Sedna, the woman who became the sea. The world of ice and water. In the time before time was counted as we count it now, in the far reaches of the Arctic where the earth meets the endless ice and the sky stretches vast and pale above frozen seas, there lived a people who understood the language of silence. These were the Inuit, the people of the ice, and their world was one of stark, breathtaking beauty, a realm where survival depended on wisdom, patience, and maintaining right relationship with the spirits that animated every living thing. The Arctic landscape was unlike anywhere else on Earth. In summer, when the sun circled the sky without ever truly setting, the ice would retreat slightly, leaving patches of dark water that reflected clouds and sky like obsidian mirrors. Seabirds would arrive in great flocks, their cries filling the air with urgent conversation. Seals would haul themselves onto ice floes to bask in the continuous daylight. The tundra would bloom with tiny, determined flowers, purple saxifrage and Arctic poppies pushing through thin soil to create carpets of unexpected color against the browns and grays of stone and earth. But in winter, everything changed. The sun would disappear for months, leaving only twilight at midday, darkness the rest of the time. The sea would freeze solid for miles in every direction, creating a vast plain of white broken only by pressure ridges where ice plates had collided and thrust upward into jagged formations. The cold was absolute, so intense it made breathing painful, so complete that exposed flesh would freeze in minutes. The northern lights would dance across the sky in sheets of green and pink and purple, rippling like curtains in an unfelt wind, beautiful and otherworldly. In this world lived communities of people who had adapted perfectly to the environment that would kill unprepared visitors in hours. They built homes from blocks of snow and ice, creating dome-shaped structures called inuit that, surprisingly, stayed warm inside thanks to seal oil lamps and the insulating properties of compacted snow. They wore clothing made from caribou hide and sealskin, layered and sewn with meticulous care to trap warmth while allowing moisture to escape. They traveled across the ice on sleds pulled by dogs, following routes passed down through generations, reading the landscape in ways outsiders could never comprehend. Their survival depended entirely on the animals, primarily seals but also walruses, whales, caribou, Arctic char, and the occasional polar bear. Every part of each animal was used: meat for food, fat for fuel and light, skins for clothing and shelter, bones for tools and weapons, sinews for thread. Nothing was wasted because waste was unthinkable in a place where resources were precious beyond measure. The relationship between hunters and animals was not one of simple predation but something more complex, more spiritual. A partnership in which animals gave themselves to hunters who respected them, and hunters honored animals through careful use of every part, through prayers and rituals that acknowledged the gift of life. Among these people, stories were not merely entertainment but essential knowledge passed from elders to children, teaching lessons about survival, about maintaining balance, about the proper way to live in a world that demanded respect and offered little forgiveness for mistakes. These stories were told in the long winter darkness, in the warmth of inuit lit by seal oil lamps, the flickering light casting moving shadows on curved snow walls. Elders' voices would rise and fall, dramatic at moments of action, soft during moments of sorrow, teaching through narrative what could not be taught through simple instruction. One such story, perhaps the most important story told throughout the Arctic from Alaska through Canada to Greenland, was the story of Sedna, the woman who became the sea goddess, the mother of all sea creatures, the mistress of the deep who controlled whether hunters would find game or families would starve. This is her story, told as it might have been told in the old days, when everyone knew that the sea had a spirit and that spirit had to be respected, honored, sometimes appeased when humans forgot the right way to live. Sedna before the sea. Long, long ago, in a camp not unlike the camps where the storyteller and listeners lived, there was born a daughter to a hunter and his wife. They named her Sedna, which meant the one down there, though at her birth no one knew the terrible prophecy contained in that name, that she would indeed go down to the very bottom of the ocean, down to a realm where no living human could follow. Sedna was a beautiful child, with skin the color of warm amber, eyes as dark as the winter sky, and hair that grew thick and long and black as ravens' wings. From her earliest years, she had a love for her hair that bordered on vanity. She would spend hours combing it with a comb carved from walrus ivory, working out every tangle, smoothing every strand until it flowed like dark water down her back. Her mother taught her how to braid it in the traditional way, how to work seal fat into it to make it shine, how to arrange it in styles that indicated her age and status within the community. As she grew from child to young woman, Sedna's beauty became remarkable. Her face was perfectly proportioned, with high cheekbones, a straight nose, full lips that smiled easily. Her body was strong from the work all Inuit women did, scraping hides, sewing clothing, gathering what little could be gathered in that harsh land, helping to set up and take down camps as the seasons required moves to follow game. But it was her hair that truly set her apart, longer than any other woman's in the camp, so thick and lustrous that it seemed to have a life of its own when she moved. As Sedna approached marrying age, perhaps 15 or 16 years old by modern counting, though the Inuit did not count years in quite the same way, young hunters from her own camp and from camps they encountered during their seasonal movements began to show interest. This was normal and expected. Women and men paired up, established households, had children, raised them to understand the skills needed for survival. Marriage was practical, necessary for the continuation of the people. But Sedna refused every suitor who approached. When young Aklak, the best seal hunter in the camp, offered to build a life with her, she turned him away. When Tuligak, son of the camp's respected elder, brought her father gifts and asked for permission to court her, she refused to consider him. When Nanook, strong and skilled with the harpoon, spoke of the fine life they could have together, she laughed and said she had no interest. Her parents, particularly her father Ongyuda, began to worry. In the Arctic, everyone had to contribute, and a woman needed a husband who could hunt, just as a hunter needed a wife who could prepare the skins and sew the clothing and manage the household. Sedna's refusal to consider any suitor was more than mere inconvenience. It threatened the delicate balance of the community, where every person had a role and every partnership strengthened the group. Sedna, her father would say, sitting with her in the igloo, the seal oil lamp casting warm light on both their faces, "You must marry. I'm getting older. Soon I will not be able to hunt as well. You need a young husband who will provide for you, who will give you children, who will honor our family by honoring you." But Sedna would simply shake her head, running her ivory comb through her magnificent hair, watching the light play on each strand. "I am happy as I am, father. I have you and mother. I have my work, my place in the camp. Why do I need a husband?" "Because that is the way," Ongyuda replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "Because you cannot live alone in this world. Because when I am gone, you will need someone to care for you. Because it is selfish to refuse every man without even considering what they offer." "They offer nothing I want," Sedna said simply, and that was the end of the conversation, though it was far from the last time they would have it. The truth was that Sedna's refusal came from something deeper than mere stubbornness or vanity, though those who gossiped in the camp attributed it to both. She had dreams, Sedna did, vivid, powerful dreams in which she saw herself as something other than a hunter's wife, something grander, something she could not quite name but could feel with absolute certainty. In her dreams, she was surrounded by water, not the frozen sea of her daily life but living water that moved and flowed. In her dreams, creatures of the deep came to her, regarded her with recognition, called her by titles she did not understand but that made her heart swell with a feeling she could not explain. When she woke from these dreams, the ordinary life that awaited her seemed small, constrained, wrong somehow. How could she explain this to her father, to her mother, to the camp? They would think she was touched, perhaps ill in the mind. Better to simply refuse the suitors and deal with their parents' frustration than try to explain dreams that made no sense even to herself. Seasons passed. Summer followed winter followed summer. Sedna remained unmarried, and her father's concern turned to anger, her mother's worry to resentment. The camp gossips had a favorite subject in the beautiful, stubborn woman who thought herself too good for any hunter, who spent her time combing her hair instead of building a useful life. Then, one spring when the ice was beginning to break up and the seals were returning to breathe at the leads in the ice, a stranger arrived at the camp. He came from the direction of the open water, paddling a kayak that moved with extraordinary grace across the dark patches between ice floes. Even from a distance, the camp's hunters could see this was no ordinary man. His kayak was too fine, his paddling too smooth, his very presence too striking. As he drew closer and pulled his kayak onto the ice, the people gathered to see who this visitor might be. The stranger was wrapped in furs so rich and soft they must have come from animals blessed by the spirits. His parka was made from bird skins, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, sewn together so skillfully that they created a garment that was both impossibly warm and impossibly light. He kept his hood pulled up, shadowing his face, but his voice when he spoke was pleasant, melodious, unlike the rough voices of the hunters who had spent their lives shouting over wind and waves. "I have come seeking Sedna," he said, "the woman of great beauty whose fame has reached even my distant home. I wish to offer for her hand, to make her my wife, to take her to a place where she will want for nothing." Angyuta stepped forward, hope and suspicion warring in his expression. "Who are you, stranger? Where is this home you speak of? What can you offer my daughter?" "My name is—" The stranger paused, and if anyone had been listening carefully, they might have noticed something odd in that pause, a hesitation that suggested the name he gave might not be entirely true. "My name is Coxswain. I come from an island far from here, a place where food is abundant and the living is easy. I am a hunter without equal in my lands. I have more stored food than I can eat, more furs than I can use, a dwelling that would seem like a palace to those who have only known skin tents and ice houses. I can give Sedna a life of comfort, beauty, ease." "Where is this island?" Angyuta asked. "I have traveled far in my years and I know of no place in the Arctic where living is easy." "It is very far," Coxswain replied smoothly. "Beyond where most hunters travel, beyond the normal range of your people. But I assure you it exists and it is everything I say and more. Bring Sedna to me. Let her decide if she wishes to accept my offer." Sedna was brought forward, curious about this stranger who claimed such impossible things. When she stood before him, Coxswain pulled back his hood enough that she could see his face, or rather, shadows of his face, for he kept it mostly concealed. What she could see was striking. Sharp features, eyes that caught the light strangely, skin that seemed almost luminous. And when he spoke to her, his voice seemed to wrap around her like warm fur, comforting and compelling at once. "Sedna," he said, "I have heard of your beauty and your reluctance to marry the common hunters of your camp. I understand. You are destined for more than the ordinary life they offer. Come with me to my island. I promise you will never be cold, never be hungry, never lack for anything your heart desires. You will live in comfort, in beauty, surrounded by abundance. You will be treated as the rare and precious being you are." And something in his words resonated with those dreams Sedna had been having, those visions of something more, something grander than the life she knew. Something in his voice made her think that perhaps he knew, perhaps he understood, perhaps he could offer the destiny she sensed awaited her. "Show me your face fully," she said, for she was not entirely foolish, not entirely blinded by pretty words. "Ah," Coxswain said, "I cannot, not here, not now. It is a custom of my people, you understand. We do not show our faces fully until we are in our own lands, among our own kind. But I assure you, there is nothing wrong with my face, nothing that should concern you. When we reach my island, when we are in my home, then you shall see me fully and understand that I am everything I claim to be." This should have been warning enough. This should have made Sedna refuse, should have made her father send this stranger away. But Angyuta was tired of his daughter's refusals, tired of the gossip, tired of worrying what would become of her. And Sedna was caught in the spell of the stranger's words, in the promise of something more, in what seemed like an answer to those confusing dreams. "I will go with you," Sedna said, and those 4 words changed everything, set in motion events that would transform her from a stubborn young woman into a being of divine power, from one who refused connection to one upon whom all connections would depend. The journey and the betrayal. Sedna gathered her few possessions, a change of clothing, her precious ivory comb, some small treasures she had kept since childhood. Her mother wept, sensing perhaps that this departure was different from the seasonal movements the camp made, that her daughter was leaving in a way that might be permanent. Her father stood stern and silent, relief and worry mixed in his expression. The camp watched as Sedna climbed into Coxot's kayak, settling herself in the passenger position while he took his place at the paddle. They pushed off from the ice, the kayak sliding smoothly into the dark water between flows. Sedna looked back once, seeing her camp growing smaller behind her, seeing her mother's figure standing motionless on the ice. Then she turned forward, watching as Coxot paddled with that same extraordinary grace she had noticed on his arrival, taking them quickly away from everything Sedna had ever known. At first, the journey seemed almost magical. Coxot paddled steadily northward toward the open sea, and the day was as fine as Arctic spring days could be, the sun bright, the wind calm, the ice beautiful in its stark whiteness against the deep blue-black of the water. Sedna trailed her hand in the water, feeling its shocking cold, watching ripples spread from her fingers. She felt a strange excitement, a sense that her real life was finally beginning, that everything before had been mere preparation for what was to come. But as hours passed and they moved farther from land, farther from the territory Sedna knew, unease began to creep into her excitement. Where was this island Coxot spoke of? They had been paddling for most of a day, and nothing appeared on the horizon but more ice, more water, more emptiness. And there was something else, something she could not quite identify but that made her skin prickle with a warning she did not fully understand. Coxot seemed to feel her growing anxiety. "Not much farther," he said, though he had said this several times already. "The island appears suddenly when you round the last cape. You will see. It is worth the journey, I promise you." Night began to fall, or rather, the brief dimming that passed for night in the Arctic summer. The sky took on colors of purple and deep blue, and stars began to appear overhead, more stars than Sedna had ever seen, so many they seemed to crowd against each other in their eagerness to shine. In other circumstances, the beauty would have moved her, but now it only increased her sense of isolation, of having moved beyond the world she knew into something unfamiliar and potentially dangerous. Finally, as true darkness approached, or as close to true darkness as came in that season, a shape appeared on the horizon. An island, just as Coxot had promised, a dark bulk against the star-bright sky. "There," Coxot said, triumph in his voice. "There is my home, Sedna. There is where your new life begins." As they drew closer, Sedna could see the island more clearly, and her unease deepened into something approaching fear. This was not a welcoming place. There were no signs of human habitation, no igluit, no skin tents, no racks for drying meat or fish. The island was little more than a barren rock thrusting up from the sea, its surface covered with bird droppings, its cliffs honeycombed with holes and ledges where seabirds nested in the thousands, their cries filling the air with harsh, chaotic sound. Coxot beached the kayak on a small shingle at the island's edge and helped Sedna out. Her legs were stiff from the long journey, and she stumbled slightly as she stepped onto solid ground for the first time in many hours. "Where is your house?" she asked, looking around at the desolate landscape, seeing nowhere that anyone could possibly live. "There," Coxot said, pointing toward the cliff face and the nesting birds. "I don't understand," Sedna said, though part of her was beginning to understand, beginning to realize the terrible truth she had been too foolish to see earlier. "Watch," Coxot said, and he began to change. It was not a gradual transformation but a sudden revelation, as if a disguise had been dropped all at once. The furs that had seemed so rich fell away, revealing that they were not furs at all but feathers, arranged cleverly to look like mammal pelts. The face that had remained mostly hidden was fully visible now, and it was not human. The eyes were too large and too round, set on the sides of the head like a bird's eyes. The nose was a beak barely softened to appear almost human, the mouth open to reveal no teeth but the hard edges of a beak's interior. Coxswain was not a man. He was a bird spirit, specifically a fulmar, one of the large seabirds that nested in the Arctic cliffs, birds known for their foul smell and their habit of spitting fetid oil at threats. He had taken human form to deceive Sedna, to lure her away from her camp, to bring her to this desolate place for purposes she could only guess at with growing horror. "Welcome to our home, wife," the bird spirit said, and his voice was no longer pleasant and melodious but harsh, with undertones of cruel amusement. "This is where we shall live, you and I, among my true people, the bird folk. I have long wanted a human wife, a beautiful companion to amuse me through the long seasons. You refused every human hunter, thinking yourself too good for them. Perhaps you will find a spirit husband more to your liking?" Sedna screamed, a sound that was lost in the cacophony of bird cries surrounding them. She turned to run, but where could she go? They were on an island, surrounded by icy water. She had no kayak, no way to leave. She was trapped utterly, completely, with no hope of escape. The time that followed was the worst of Sedna's life. She who had been cherished, who had spent her days in the relative comfort of her family's home, who had taken for granted the warmth of seal oil lamps and the taste of fresh seal meat, who had loved combing her beautiful hair by the lamp's light, that Sedna ceased to exist, replaced by a prisoner living in worse conditions than she had imagined possible. The bird spirit did not even pretend to fulfill his promises now that he had her trapped. There was no comfortable dwelling, only a crude nest on a cliff ledge, exposed to wind and rain and cold. There was no abundance of food, only raw fish when the bird spirit remembered or cared to provide it, fish that tasted of rot because the bird folk stored them in their gullets, partially digesting them before regurgitation. There was no ease or comfort or beauty, only misery and isolation and the constant noise of the nesting birds, their shrieks and cries making sleep almost impossible. Sedna's beautiful hair, which she had loved so much, became tangled and filthy. Without fresh water to wash it, without seal fat to keep it smooth, without time or energy to comb it properly, it matted and knotted, catching pieces of feather and fish scale and bird droppings. She tried to maintain it at first, tried to use her ivory comb to work out the tangles, but it was hopeless. The comb broke. Her hair remained a matted mess. And gradually she stopped trying, stopped caring, sank into a state of despair so deep it was almost peaceful, a giving up that at least required no more effort. The bird spirit was cruel in casual ways, in ways that suggested he had no real understanding of what a human needed or wanted, or perhaps understanding but not caring. He would mock her tears, would laugh at her desperate pleas to take her home, would sometimes simply fly away for days, leaving her alone on the cliff ledge with no food, no company but the mindless seabirds, no hope of rescue. Time passed, weeks, perhaps months. Sedna lost track, lost interest. Her body grew thin from inadequate food. Her skin became rough and weathered from constant exposure. Her spirit, which had been so proud, so certain of her destiny, shrank to almost nothing. She wished for death sometimes, stood at the edge of her cliff ledge looking down at the rocks and waves below, wondering if jumping would be preferable to continuing this existence. But she did not jump. Some stubborn core of her, some essential Sedna that refused to be completely extinguished, kept her alive, kept her going through each miserable day, kept a tiny spark of hope that somehow, someday this nightmare would end. The father's journey. Back at the camp, Yuta had begun to regret his decision to let Sedna go with the stranger. At first, he had been relieved, had told himself he had done the right thing, that Sedna would be happy in her new life, that she had finally found someone who met her impossible standards. But as days turned to weeks, unease grew within him. He found himself thinking about the stranger at odd moments, the way he had kept his face hidden, the way he had been vague about exactly where his island was, the way he had seemed almost too smooth, too persuasive. Something had been wrong, Yuta realized too late, and he had been so eager to solve the problem of his unmarried daughter that he had ignored the warning signs. His wife was more direct in her accusations. "You sold our daughter to a stranger," she said, her voice heavy with grief and accusation. "You gave her to someone we knew nothing about, and now she is gone, and we don't even know if she is alive or dead, happy or suffering." "I thought I was helping," Yuta protested, but the words sounded weak even to himself. "You thought you were solving a problem," his wife countered. "You were thinking of yourself, of the camp's gossip, of your own frustration with her refusals. You were not thinking of Sedna, of what she wanted, of what might be best for her." These words pierced Anguta's heart like a harpoon, because he knew they were true. He had been selfish. He had prioritized his own peace over his daughter's welfare. And now she was gone, taken by a stranger to an unknown place, and it was entirely his fault. The guilt grew until Yuta could not bear it any longer. He began asking other hunters who traveled widely if they had heard of this cocksot, if they knew of an island matching the description the stranger had given. No one knew anything. The name was unfamiliar. No such island existed in the territories they knew. Finally, Yuta made a decision. He would search for his daughter. He would travel north, toward the open sea, toward the direction the stranger had paddled. He would search every island, every barren rock, until he found her or found proof of her death. It was a dangerous journey, one he might not survive, but he owed it to Sedna to try. He prepared his kayak carefully, gathering supplies for a long journey, dried meat, seal fat for eating and for lamp fuel, extra clothing, his hunting weapons. He told the camp where he was going and why. His wife wept again, terrified she would lose both daughter and husband, but she did not try to stop him. She understood, as he did, that this journey was necessary, that he could not live with himself if he did not attempt it. Yuta set out on a morning when the weather seemed favorable, paddling north into waters he had rarely traveled, following intuition and hope more than any real knowledge of where he was going. Days passed as he moved from one hunting ground to another, asking every hunter he encountered if they had seen a young woman with a stranger, if they knew of islands beyond the normal range. Most had seen nothing, knew nothing. But one old hunter, who had traveled farther north than most, mentioned an island he had passed once, a barren rock covered with nesting fulmars, home to bird spirits if the old stories were to be believed. "I would not go there," the old hunter said. "Nothing good dwells in such places. But if you must search, it lies 3 days' paddle to the north and west, following the current that flows toward the midnight sun." Yuta thanked him and continued north, his heart both heavy with dread and light with hope. 3 days later, as the old hunter had said, he spotted an island on the horizon, dark and barren, covered with wheeling, crying birds. As he approached, he could see that this was indeed a desolate place, a place where no human should live, a place that radiated wrongness. He beached his kayak and called out his daughter's name. "Sedna. Sedna, are you here? It is your father. I have come to bring you home." For a long moment there was no response, only the harsh cries of the fulmars. Then, from a ledge high on the cliff face, he heard a voice, weak, hoarse, barely recognizable, but unmistakably his daughter's voice. "Father? Is it really you?" Yuta felt his heart clench with joy and pain combined. She was alive, but the voice was so changed, so diminished. "Yes, daughter. I have come to take you home. Can you come down?" Sedna appeared at the edge of the ledge, and Yuta gasped at the sight of her. The beautiful young woman he had sent away was almost unrecognizable. She was gaunt, her clothing torn and filthy, her once magnificent hair a matted, tangled mess. But her eyes, those at least were still hers, and they filled with tears as she saw him. "I knew you would come," she said, though she had not really known any such thing, had almost given up hope. I prayed to the spirits that you would remember me, that you would regret letting me go, that you would search for me. And here you are. I am so sorry, Anyuta called up to her. I was wrong. I should never have let you go with that stranger. Can you climb down? We must leave quickly before the bird spirit returns. Sedna made her way carefully down the cliff face, using handholds she had learned in her months of imprisonment, moving slowly because she was weak from poor food and despair. When she finally reached the ground and ran to her father, they embraced, both weeping, Anyuta from relief and guilt, Sedna from joy and the first real hope she had felt since arriving on this cursed island. Quickly, Anyuta said, "Get in the kayak. We must be far from here before Koksot discovers you are gone." Sedna climbed into the kayak, settling into the same position she had occupied on the journey out, though everything felt different now. Not excitement but desperate hope, not curiosity but urgent need to escape. Anyuta pushed off from the shore and began paddling, his arms working strongly despite his age, every stroke taking them farther from the terrible island. But they had not gone far, perhaps an hour's paddle, when the bird spirit returned. Koksot appeared as a dark shape against the sky, flying with the powerful wing beats of a fulmar in full flight. He circled once above the island, saw that Sedna was gone, saw the kayak moving away in the distance. And his rage was immense, terrible, the fury of a spirit who had been robbed of his prize. He flew toward them, his cries mixing with the cries of all the fulmars from his island, calling them to follow him, calling them to help him reclaim what he considered his property. Hundreds of birds rose from their nests and followed their master, creating a cloud of wings and beaks and harsh voices that darkened the sky. Anyuta saw them coming and paddled harder, terror lending strength to his aging arms. But a kayak, no matter how skillfully paddled, cannot outrun birds in flight. Within minutes, Koksot had caught up with them, circling above, screaming his rage. "She is mine," the bird spirit shrieked. "You cannot take what belongs to me. Return her or face my wrath. She is my daughter." Anyuta shouted back. "No spirit has claim on her that supersedes a father's right. I am taking her home." In response, Koksot began to work magic, calling on his power as a spirit, calling on the forces of storm and wind and wave that birds of the far north could command. The calm sea began to churn. Waves rose, growing larger with each moment, slapping against the kayak, threatening to swamp it. Wind howled from every direction at once, making it nearly impossible to paddle in any straight line. The fulmars dove at the kayak, their wings beating close to Anyuta's head, their beaks snapping near his eyes, their foul-smelling oil spattering on him and Sedna. The storm grew worse, the waves larger, until it seemed certain the kayak would capsize and both Anyuta and Sedna would be thrown into the freezing water to die. And in that moment, Anyuta made a choice that would echo through all of Inuit history, a choice that would transform his daughter from a suffering young woman into a being of divine power, a choice born of terror and selfishness and the fundamental unfairness that sometimes marks the relationship between fathers and daughters. He looked at Sedna, huddled in the kayak, and he looked at the raging sea around them, and he thought, "If I keep her, we will both die. If I give her back to the bird spirit, I might survive." "I'm sorry," he said, though the words were almost lost in the wind and the bird cries and the crashing waves. "I'm so sorry, daughter." And before Sedna could understand what he meant, before she could protest or plead or try to change his mind, Anyuta grabbed her and threw her overboard, casting her into the icy water as a sacrifice to appease the bird spirit's rage and the storm's fury. Sedna hit the water and felt its shocking cold envelope her completely. For a moment she was too stunned to react. Her father whom she had prayed would rescue her, who had come all this way to bring her home, who had embraced her and wept with relief at finding her alive, her father had just thrown her into the sea to die. The betrayal was more painful than the cold, more shocking than the violence of the storm. This was worse than being tricked by the bird spirit, worse than months of suffering on the desolate island. This was her own father choosing his life over hers, abandoning her when she needed him most, proving that his search had been about assuaging his guilt rather than truly saving her. But Sedna did not want to die. Despite everything, despite all the suffering she had endured, despite this ultimate betrayal, she wanted to live. So she swam to the kayak and grabbed its edge, trying to pull herself back in, trying to save herself since no one else would save her. "Please," she cried. "Father, please. Don't leave me here. I'll die. Please." Angyuda, his mind clouded by panic and the storm and the terrible choice he had made, saw his daughter clinging to the kayak and realized she would capsize it, would pull them both under. And so he did something even worse than throwing her overboard. He pulled out his knife and brought it down on her fingers. Not once, but over and over, in a frenzy of fear and desperation. He chopped at her hands as she clung to the kayak's edge. First he severed the tips of her fingers, the final joints flying off into the dark water. Sedna screamed and tried to maintain her grip with what remained. So he brought the knife down again, severing the middle joints. Still she held on, her will to live stronger than the pain, stronger than the horror of what was happening. So Angyuda struck a third time, severing the final joints, taking her fingers entirely, leaving her with only the stumps of her hands. With nothing left to grip, Sedna fell away from the kayak, sinking into the cold dark water, her blood streaming from her mutilated hands, her strength finally failing, her will to fight finally exhausted. As she sank, something extraordinary happened. Something that would transform not just Sedna but the entire Arctic world, something that would elevate a suffering young woman into a being of power and purpose, something that would give meaning to her pain even if it could not erase it. Her severed finger joints, falling through the water around her, began to change. The tips of her fingers transformed into ringed seals, the most important food source for the Inuit, the animals whose meat and fat and skin sustained life in the Arctic. The middle joints became bearded seals, larger, more dangerous to hunt but providing even more resources. The base joints became walruses, massive creatures with fierce tusks and thick hides and abundant fat. As these transformations occurred, as Sedna's suffering gave birth to the very creatures that would sustain her people, power flooded into her changing form. She was dying, yes. The cold and the blood loss and the terrible trauma of what had been done to her were killing the human girl named Sedna. But something else was being born, something far greater than a girl, something divine. The spirits of the water, the ancient powers that had dwelt in the Arctic seas since before humans came to these lands, recognized what was happening and reached out to her. They saw her suffering, saw her transformation, saw the opportunity to create something new. A being who could bridge the gap between human and spirit, between the upper world and the deep, between the hunters who took life and the animals who gave it. As Sedna sank deeper, as the human part of her grew weaker, the divine part grew stronger. Her body began to change in more fundamental ways. From the waist down, her legs fused and transformed, becoming the powerful tail of a sea creature. Some say like a seal, others like a whale, still others like some creature that had never existed before, a fusion of all sea mammals into one form. Her skin took on new qualities, able to withstand the cold and pressure of the deep ocean. Her lungs adapted, able to extract oxygen from water as easily as from air. Her eyes changed, able to see clearly in the darkness of the ocean depths where no sunlight penetrated. She was no longer fully human, no longer fully spirit, but something in between, the first of her kind, unique and powerful, transformed by suffering into something that would be both feared and honored, both served and served by, both blessing and potential curse to the people who would come to know her. Sedna sank all the way to the ocean floor, down past where even the deepest diving seals could follow, down where the water was absolutely black and absolutely still, down to a realm that would become known as Adlavun, the underworld, the place of spirits, the deep from which all life came and to which all eventually returned. And there, on the ocean floor in absolute darkness and silence, Sedna's transformation completed. She had become the Sea Mother, the mistress of the deep, the one who would rule over all marine life, the goddess upon whom the Inuit people would depend for their very survival. The realm beneath the waves. In the beginning of her time at the ocean's bottom, Sedna knew only rage and grief. She sat in the darkness, her mutilated hands unable to touch or hold anything properly, her matted hair streaming around her like seaweed, her heart filled with such fury at her father, at the bird spirit, at all who had betrayed her that she thought the rage might consume her completely. She called out in her anger, and the sea creatures she had created, the seals and walruses that had been her severed fingers, heard her call. They came to her, drawn by a connection they did not understand but could not resist, gathering around her in the darkness like children around a mother, waiting for her commands. And Sedna discovered that she had power over them, absolute and complete. She could call them to her and they would come. She could send them away and they would go. She could determine whether they made themselves available to hunters or hid in the depths where no harpoon could reach them. She could, in effect, control whether the Inuit people ate or starved, thrived or died. In her initial rage she used this power cruelly. She kept all the sea creatures close to her, down in the depths, refusing to let them rise to the surface where they could be hunted. The Inuit camps began to suffer. Hunters went out day after day and found nothing. No seals at their breathing holes, no walruses hauled out on the ice, no signs of the animals that had always been there before. Children grew thin. Old people weakened. The people prayed to the spirits they knew, made offerings, performed all the rituals they understood, but nothing helped. The sea had become barren, empty of life, as if all the animals had simply vanished. The shamans, those specially gifted individuals who could journey in spirit to realms ordinary people could not reach, began to search for the cause of this calamity. In trance states induced by drumming and chanting, they sent their spirits traveling through the spirit world, looking for answers, seeking to understand what had gone so terribly wrong. One shaman, more powerful than the others, journeyed deeper than any had gone before, diving down through layers of reality until he reached the ocean floor where Sedna dwelt. And there he saw her, a being of terrible power and terrible suffering, part woman and part sea creature, her hands mutilated, her hair tangled, her face frozen in an expression of rage and grief. The shaman approached carefully, respectfully, understanding immediately that he was in the presence of a being who could destroy him with a thought if she chose. "Great One," he said, "I come seeking understanding. The people are starving. The sea creatures have vanished. We do not know what we have done to deserve this, but we beg for mercy, for guidance, for a way to make things right." Sedna regarded him with eyes that held fathoms of pain. "Done?" she said, her voice like the grinding of ice flows, like the deep currents of the ocean. "What have you done? You have betrayed as all humans betray. You have taken as all humans take. You have forgotten as all humans forget that there must be balance, respect, proper relationship between those who hunt and those who are hunted. Tell me," the shaman said. "Tell me what we must do. Tell me how we can restore balance." And so Sedna told him her story, the betrayals by the bird spirit and by her father, her transformation, her new nature as the mistress of the deep. She told him that she held the sea creatures close because she was angry, because she hurt, because her tangled hair reminded her constantly of her suffering and her rage grew with each tangle, each mat, each impossible knot. "I cannot comb my own hair," she said, holding up her mutilated hands. "I cannot smooth these tangles. And so they grow worse, and in them become caught the broken promises of humans, the disrespectful treatment of animals, the violations of proper ways. The tangles trap my creatures, hold them close to me, prevent them from rising to the surface. If someone could comb my hair, could remove the tangles, could take away the physical manifestation of all that anger and pain, then perhaps I would calm. Perhaps I would release the creatures. Perhaps hunting could resume." The shaman understood. He asked permission to approach, and when Sedna granted it, he carefully, gently began to comb her hair with his spirit hands, working out the tangles with patience and compassion, speaking to her as he worked, acknowledging her pain, apologizing on behalf of all humans for the wrongs she had suffered. It took a long time. Time moved strangely in the spirit realm, but gradually the tangles came out. The shaman worked from the ends up, careful not to pull too hard, patient with each knot, treating Sedna's hair with the respect it deserved, the respect she had always wanted for it. And as he worked, he could feel Sedna's rage diminishing, not disappearing entirely but softening, becoming something she could live with rather than something that controlled her completely. When her hair finally hung smooth and clean, flowing around her in the deep currents like dark silk, Sedna sighed, a sound like water flowing over stones, like wind across ice, a sound that held release and relief in equal measure. "Thank you," she said. "I have not been treated with such gentleness since before all of this began. Your kindness matters more than you know." "Will you release the creatures now?" the shaman asked. "Will you allow the hunters to find game again?" Sedna considered. "I will," she said finally. "But understand that this is not a permanent solution. My hair will tangle again as humans violate the proper ways, as they disrespect the animals, as they forget the balance that must be maintained. When it becomes too tangled, when the pain becomes too great again, I will call the creatures back to me. Someone will have to come, comb my hair again, remind me that not all humans are betrayers, that some still remember respect and gratitude. We will remember," the shaman promised. "We will send shamans to you when hunting fails, to comb your hair, to renew right relationship. And we will teach the people the proper ways, the rules you require, so that your hair will not tangle as quickly." "See that you do," Sedna said, and she released the sea creatures from her presence. The shaman returned to his body, waking in his camp to find the other people gathered around him anxiously. He told them what he had learned, told them of Sedna and her requirements, told them the rules that must be followed to keep the sea mother content and the sea creatures available for hunting. These rules were specific and important. When a seal was killed, it must be given a drink of fresh water immediately, to honor the fact that seals spent their lives in salt water and might thirst for freshness. No seal meat could be cooked on the same day walrus meat was cooked, for mixing the species disrespected both. The bladders of seals must be saved and honored, for they held the spirit of the animal. Women must not work on certain skins during their moon time, for the mixture of blood and animal spirit was dangerous. Hunters must speak respectfully to animals before killing them, thanking them for the gift of their lives. Nothing from a killed animal should be wasted. Every part should be used with gratitude and care. There were dozens of other rules, each one designed to ensure that hunters remembered they were not simply taking life but receiving it as a gift, that animals were not mere resources but beings worthy of respect, that the relationship between hunter and hunted was sacred and required proper maintenance. When the people learned these rules and committed to following them, the sea creatures returned. Seals appeared at their breathing holes again. Walruses hauled out on ice floes where hunters could find them. Fish ran thick in the streams. The famine ended and the people were saved. But true to Sedna's warning, her hair would tangle again. Perhaps a hunter would become arrogant, forgetting to thank the seal he killed. Perhaps someone would carelessly waste good meat, throwing it to dogs without first eating the best parts themselves. Perhaps the rules would be neglected, shortcuts taken, proper respect forgotten in the ease of successful hunts. When violations accumulated, when disrespect built up, Sedna's hair would become tangled again, filled with the spiritual equivalent of dirt and broken promises, matted and snarled in ways that caused her pain and reminded her of her suffering. And when that happened, she would call the sea creatures back to her, holding them close in her pain and rage, and hunting would fail again until a shaman could make the dangerous journey to her realm, comb out the tangles, renew the relationship between humans and the sea mother. This pattern would repeat across generations, across centuries, becoming the fundamental rhythm of Arctic life. The need to maintain right relationship with Sedna, to honor the rules she required, to remember that survival depended not just on skill but on respect, not just on taking but on gratitude, not just on using resources but on honoring the sacred in all beings. Sedna's realm. Over time, as Sedna settled into her role as Sea Mother, her realm at the ocean bottom evolved from mere darkness into something more complex and strangely beautiful in its own way. The place where she dwelt became known more fully as Adlavun, and it was not just her home but a realm where the spirits of certain dead came, particularly those who had drowned or died of other water-related causes, who naturally belonged in the domain of the Sea Mother. Sedna's actual dwelling was a palace of sorts, though not like any human habitation. It was formed from the bones of whales, their massive ribs creating curved walls, their vertebrae forming columns, their skulls creating chambers. Seal skins hung like tapestries, and walrus ivory decorated every surface. The floor was the ocean bed itself, sand and stone, shells and the bones of smaller creatures, everything softened by the constant gentle flow of deep currents. Light came not from sun or stars, those could not penetrate this deep, but from bioluminescent creatures that drifted through the water like living stars. Jellyfish pulsed with gentle blue light. Tiny shrimp created clouds of phosphorescence. Strange fish with their own lanterns swam by, illuminating the darkness in brief flashes. The effect was otherworldly, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with human standards of beauty but was lovely nonetheless. In this realm, Sedna maintained her vigil over the sea creatures. They swam around her constantly, seals playing in the currents, walruses moving with unexpected grace through the water, whales passing by with their haunting songs, fish schooling in silver clouds. They were hers, created from her suffering, connected to her in ways that transcended normal relationships between beings. She could feel each one, know when hunters took them, understand their lives and deaths in intimate detail. She cared for them, protected them, ensured they thrived. When shamans came to comb her hair, they found not just a suffering goddess but a being who loved her creatures, who took joy in their lives even as she mourned those who were taken by hunters. The sea creatures were her children in a very real sense, more truly hers than any children she might have borne had she lived a normal human life. Sedna also judged the spirits of the drowned, determining their fate in the afterlife based on how they had lived. Those who had followed the rules, respected the animals, lived properly and died honorably, these she welcomed into her realm, where they could dwell in comfort, perhaps eventually being reborn or moving on to other spirit realms. Those who had violated the rules, disrespected the animals, lived selfishly and died dishonorably, these she might punish, might imprison, might torment until they understood the gravity of their offenses. She was not cruel for the sake of cruelty, but she was just, and her justice was absolute. There was no deceiving her, no hiding one's true nature, no pretending to have been better than one actually was. In her presence, all truth was laid bare, and judgment came based on that truth, inexorable and fair. The shamans who visited her developed deep respect for her over time, and some even developed something like affection, understanding that beneath the divine power and the terrible suffering was a being who simply wanted what all beings want, to be treated with respect, to have her pain acknowledged, to receive kindness. They would spend time talking with her when they came to comb her hair, telling her news from the upper world, describing the lives of the people, the births and deaths, the successes and struggles. And Sedna would listen, and sometimes she would smile. A sad smile, perhaps tinged with memories of her own brief time in the upper world, but genuine nonetheless. She was isolated in her realm, alone in a way that even gods should not be alone, and these visits from shamans provided connection, reminded her that she mattered not just as a source of food but as a being worthy of attention and care. Some shamans would sing to her as they combed her hair, old songs from the time before her transformation, songs she might have heard in her father's camp, songs that recalled the world she had left behind. These songs moved her deeply, bringing tears that mixed with the ocean water around her, bringing both pain and something like healing, reminding her that she had once been human, that she could still feel human emotions despite her divine transformation. Over centuries, The relationship between Sedna and the Inuit people became so fundamental that it was impossible to imagine Arctic life without her. She was the sea mother, the provider, the judge, the terrible and merciful goddess who held life and death in her mutilated hands. Every hunter knew her story, understood her requirements, respected her power. Every child learned the rules that kept her content. Every shaman trained in the techniques needed to reach her realm and comb her hair. Sedna became more than a goddess. She became a principle, a way of understanding the relationship between humans and nature, between taking and giving, between use and respect. Her story taught that actions have consequences, that betrayal leaves scars, that suffering can transform into power, that even the most wounded being deserves compassion and care. The eternal cycle. And so the pattern continued, generation after generation, century after century. Humans hunted the sea creatures, taking what they needed to survive, honoring the rules that kept Sedna content. When rules were followed and respect maintained, hunting was good and families thrived. When rules were violated and respect forgotten, Sedna's hair would tangle and hunting would fail until a shaman could make the journey to comb it out again. This cycle was not punishment exactly, though it could feel punitive to those who suffered during times of scarcity. Rather, it was a teaching, a constant reminder that right relationship must be actively maintained, that respect cannot be assumed but must be demonstrated through action, that the gift of life from animals required reciprocal gifts of honor and gratitude from humans. The shamans who made the journey to Sedna's realm told of the obstacles they encountered: grinding ice that crushed spirits who tried to pass, a threshold thin as a knife's edge that only the pure of heart could cross, guardian spirits who tested the shaman's worthiness before allowing passage. These obstacles were real but also symbolic, representing the difficulty of the work, the seriousness of the relationship, the fact that maintaining connection with the divine required genuine effort and could not be taken lightly. Some shamans formed particularly close relationships with Sedna over the course of their lives, visiting her regularly not just in times of crisis but as ongoing practice, maintaining the relationship even when hunting was good, preventing problems rather than only addressing them after they arose. These shamans were especially valued in their communities, for their proactive care of the relationship with the sea mother meant fewer times of famine, fewer periods of suffering, more consistent success in hunting. Sedna valued these shamans in return, greeting them warmly when they came, speaking to them of her concerns, sometimes even warning them of coming dangers, storms approaching, ice conditions changing, periods when hunting would be difficult for natural reasons rather than spiritual ones. This exchange of information and care strengthened the bond between the upper world and the deep, between humanity and divinity, between the mundane and the sacred. In her long existence at the ocean bottom, Sedna also encountered other spirits. The ancient beings who had dwelt in Arctic waters since long before humans arrived, the orcas who were said to be her dogs, the whales who were wise beyond human comprehension, the mysterious things that lived in the deepest trenches and were rarely seen even by the sea mother herself. She formed alliances and friendships, created a court of sorts from these other spirits, built a society of the deep that mirrored in some ways the human communities above. She was not lonely exactly, though she remembered loneliness from her early time at the ocean floor. She had her creatures, her visiting shamans, her fellow spirits. But there remained an isolation inherent to her position, a distance that could never be fully bridged. She was the sea mother, unique and powerful, transformed by suffering into something that could never quite connect with others the way ordinary beings connect. This isolation was the price of her power, the burden of her transformation, the shadow side of her divinity. Sometimes, in her long meditations in the darkness, Sedna would think back to her time as a human girl, to the days when her greatest concern was combing her beautiful hair by seal oil lamplight, when she had refused hunter after hunter because she sensed some greater destiny awaiting her. And she would marvel at how true that sensing had been, how accurate her dreams of something more had proved to be, though the reality had come through such terrible means, such profound suffering, such complete transformation of everything she had been. Had it been worth it? She did not know. Could not know really, because the question implied a choice that had never truly been hers. She had not chosen to be betrayed by the bird spirit. Had not chosen to have her father throw her overboard. Had not chosen to have her fingers severed. These things had been done to her, and her transformation had been the universe's response, the spirit's way of making meaning from meaningless cruelty, of creating something valuable from the wreckage of a young woman's destroyed life. But she had chosen in the centuries since how to be the sea mother. She could have remained purely vengeful, purely cruel, taking out her rage on all humans for the crimes of a few. Instead, she had developed into something more complex. Justice rather than mere vengeance, teaching rather than simple punishment, a complicated relationship with humanity that acknowledged both her suffering and their need, both her power and their vulnerability. This choice, to be more than just her trauma, to let shamans comfort her, to release the sea creatures when her hair was combed, to maintain connection rather than retreating into absolute isolation. This was Sedna's victory over those who had harmed her. They had tried to destroy her, and instead they had transformed her into something immortal, powerful, necessary. They had meant to end her, and instead they had made her eternal. In that, there was a bitter triumph, a kind of justice that the universe itself had provided even if individual perpetrators faced no direct punishment. And so Sedna continued and continues still in the stories told by those who remember the old ways, those who understand that the relationship between humans and nature requires maintenance, that respect must be actively practiced, that the gifts we receive from the world around us demand gratitude and reciprocal care. The message in the myth. The story of Sedna speaks across ages and cultures, teaching lessons that remain relevant even in times and places far from the Arctic ice. At its heart, the story is about transformation, how suffering can be transmuted into power, how betrayal can lead to independence, how losing one's old life can open space for a new existence that would have been impossible to imagine before. But it is also about relationship, about the fact that even the most powerful beings need gentleness sometimes, need to have their hair combed metaphorically speaking, need to be reminded through acts of care and respect that they are valued for more than just what they provide. Sedna gives the sea creatures that hunters need, but she needs in return to be honored, to have her rules followed, to receive the visits of shamans who treat her with compassion. This exchange is the heart of sustainable relationship with nature. The understanding that taking requires giving, that use requires respect, that the bounty of the natural world is not unlimited and unconditional but depends on humans maintaining right relationship with the beings and forces that sustain life. In this sense, Sedna's story is an ecological teaching, a reminder that environmental degradation and resource depletion follow naturally from forgetting respect, from treating nature as mere resource rather than as something sacred that requires honor. The story also teaches about the aftermath of trauma, about how those who have been deeply wounded carry that wounding forward, how their pain can affect entire communities, how healing requires not just time but active care from others. Sedna's tangled hair is a perfect metaphor for this, the accumulation of hurts and violations that become so matted and snarled that the wounded person cannot manage them alone, that requires others to offer patient, gentle help, working out each tangle with care and compassion. For the Inuit people, Sedna's story provided a framework for understanding their relationship with the sea and its creatures, a way of teaching children the importance of following rules and showing respect, a cultural narrative that reinforced values essential for survival in one of Earth's harshest environments. But the story's resonance extends far beyond this original context, speaking to universal human experiences of betrayal and transformation, suffering and power, isolation and connection. Sedna in the present. In contemporary times, as traditional Arctic cultures interact with modernity, Sedna's story persists, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining its essential truths. Some Inuit communities still tell her story to children, still maintain some version of respect for the rules she requires, still understand hunting as a sacred relationship rather than mere resource extraction. Artists have depicted Sedna in countless ways, in traditional carvings from whalebone and walrus ivory, in contemporary paintings and prints, in sculptures that grace museums around the world. Each artist brings their own interpretation, but common elements persist. Her flowing hair, her mutilated hands, her half-human half-sea creature form, her expression of mingled power and sorrow. Writers have retold her story in various forms, sometimes staying close to traditional versions, sometimes adapting it for contemporary audiences, sometimes using it as a jumping-off point for exploring themes of feminine power, environmental consciousness, trauma and transformation. Each retelling adds to the myth's richness, demonstrates its continued relevance, keeps Sedna alive in cultural consciousness. Some modern spiritual practitioners have adopted Sedna as a goddess they honor, drawing on her story for teachings about transformation, about maintaining relationship with the natural world, about the sacred feminine, about power that comes from suffering understood and integrated rather than denied. They create rituals inspired by the hair-combing ceremony, finding in it a beautiful metaphor for the care we owe each other, the patience required to help someone untangle from trauma, the importance of gentle persistence in the work of healing. Environmental activists sometimes invoke Sedna as a symbol of nature's power to withhold its gifts when disrespected, as a reminder that the ocean's bounty is not infinite, that overfishing and pollution and climate change are equivalent to violating Sedna's rules on a massive scale, that the tangling of her hair might now represent the plastic debris that chokes sea creatures and the chemical contamination that poisons food chains. In all these ways and more, Sedna's story continues to live, to teach, to inspire, to challenge. She remains the sea mother, the mistress of the deep, the transformed victim who became a goddess, the one who holds life in her mutilated hands and dispenses it according to her own sense of justice tempered by mercy, of power balanced by the memory of vulnerability. Closing meditation. And now, as this story draws toward its close, as your eyes grow heavy and your breathing deepens into the rhythm of approaching sleep, imagine yourself descending gently through dark water, sinking peacefully down through layers of ocean, moving from light to twilight to darkness to a deeper darkness still. You are safe in this descent, protected by the knowledge that you move through sacred space, approaching the realm of a being who understands suffering and transformation, who knows what it means to survive betrayal and loss, who has learned over countless years how to transmute pain into purpose. You reach the ocean floor and there she is, Sedna, the sea mother, sitting in her palace of whale bone and seal skin, her beautiful black hair flowing around her in the gentle current, her dark eyes watching your approach with recognition and something like warmth. She gestures you closer, and you sit beside her in the soft sand of the ocean floor. Around you swim all the creatures of the sea, seals playing and twirling, whales passing by with their ancient songs, fish schooling in silver clouds, all the abundance of ocean life surrounding you both in comfortable companionship. "Welcome," Sedna says, her voice deep as the ocean itself, gentle as the caress of currents. "I know why you have come. Not to comb my hair, though that is always appreciated, but simply to hear my story, to understand what it teaches, to carry something of it back with you to the upper world." You nod, and she smiles. A real smile, warm and generous, showing that beneath all the power and the suffering is a being who appreciates being heard, being understood, being recognized as more than just a source of resources. "My story teaches many things," she continues, her hands, despite their mutilation, moving gracefully as she speaks. "But perhaps the most important is this: what breaks us can also make us. What destroys us can also transform us. What we lose can become what we create. My fingers became the seals and walruses. My suffering became my power. My isolation became my connection to all sea creatures. Nothing was wasted. Even the worst that happened to me served a purpose in the end." Her voice grows softer, more intimate, as if speaking just to you. "You too carry wounds. Everyone does. Some large, some small, some visible, some hidden. But those wounds do not have to be only scars, only pain, only evidence of what was done to you. They can also be sources of wisdom, of compassion for others who suffer, of power that comes from having survived and integrated your suffering rather than being destroyed by it. She reaches out, carefully, given her mutilated hands, and touches your forehead gently. When you return to the upper world, to your waking life, remember me. Remember that even goddesses need their hair combed sometimes. Remember that the greatest power can come from the deepest suffering. Remember that transformation is possible, that what seems like ending can be beginning, that loss creates space for something new to emerge. Around you, the sea creatures swim in gentle spirals, their movement creating subtle currents that rock you gently, like a child being rocked to sleep. The bioluminescent creatures pulse with soft blue light, creating patterns that are hypnotic and soothing. The whale songs in the distance sound like lullabies sung in a language older than words. Sleep now, Sedna whispers. Sleep here in my realm, safe and protected, held by the deep water that knows all secrets and keeps them all. Sleep and dream of transformation, of suffering becoming power, of endings becoming beginnings, of wounds becoming wisdom. Sleep and know that you are held, that you are witnessed, that your story matters even when it seems too small or too painful to tell. Sleep and rest and renew yourself in these dark, peaceful depths. Your eyes close. Your breathing slows. The ocean holds you gently, perfectly buoyant, neither sinking nor rising but suspended in perfect balance. Around you the sea creatures maintain their watch, Sedna's children protecting you as they have protected all who come to her realm with respect and open hearts. In your dreams you might swim with the seals, playing in the currents with joy and abandon. You might hear the whales' songs and understand their meaning for the first time, comprehend their vast wisdom spoken in sounds that penetrate to the very soul. You might touch the fish with gentle hands and feel their silver coolness, their simple contentment with their fishy lives, their perfect adaptation to their watery world. Or you might simply float in the darkness, peaceful and content, held by Sedna's presence, knowing that you are in a place where suffering is understood, where transformation is honored, where even the most broken beings can find wholeness of a kind, can discover purpose in pain, can learn that sometimes the most profound gifts come through the most difficult experiences. The ocean rocks you gently. The creatures sing their wordless songs. The darkness is complete but not frightening. It is the darkness of the womb, of potential, of the deep rest that comes before new growth, new life, new possibilities emerge. Sleep deeply in Sedna's realm. Rest completely in her care. And know that when you wake, you will carry something of her teaching back with you. The knowledge that transformation is possible, that suffering can become power, that even the most wounded heart can learn to love again, that what is broken can be made into something new and perhaps more beautiful than what existed before the breaking. Rest now. Dream deeply. And let the Sea Mother watch over you as you sleep, as she has watched over her people for countless generations, as she will continue to watch for as long as ice floats on Arctic waters and seals swim in the deep and humans remember to honor the sacred in all things. The whale song continues. The current flows. The bioluminescent creatures pulse their gentle light. And you sleep, safe and peaceful, held in the care of a goddess who knows both suffering and strength, both sorrow and power, both isolation and profound connection to all life in the ocean she rules. Good night, dear friend. Sleep in Sedna's realm. Rest in the knowledge that your own suffering is not meaningless, that your own wounds can be sources of wisdom, that your own transformation continues with each breath, each beat of your heart, each moment you choose to integrate your experiences rather than be defined by them. Sleep now in peace. Dream of deep waters and gentle creatures and a goddess who combed her beautiful hair by lamplight once, long ago, before betrayal and transformation made her into something more than human, something essential, something divine. The ocean holds you. The darkness embraces you. Sedna watches over you. And all is well, all is as it should be, all is moving toward healing and wholeness even when the path seems dark and the journey seems too difficult to complete. Rest now. Sleep deeply. and wake refreshed, renewed, carrying something of Sedna's strength back into your waking life, ready to face whatever comes with the knowledge that transformation is possible, that endings serve purposes, that even the most painful experiences can become sources of wisdom and power. Good night, sweet dreams. And may the Sea Mother's blessing rest upon you as you sleep.